Good morning. I'd like to welcome you, to be the first to welcome you to the ninth plenary of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. My name is Jim Fenton. I'm an individual member of IDESG, and we'll explain what individual member means in a little bit. And I'm here to present the new member orientation. For those of you here in the audience, if you're in fact a new attendee at IDESG, can you raise your hand? Great, we've got several. So I'll do my best to get you up to speed so that this will be a productive 3 days. And the clicker isn't. Oh, there it is. So you'll find with IDESG that we try and put everything on the web, including the agenda, which you were probably given a hard copy of when you got here if you're here in person. I realize that we've got some people that are probably watching over the webcast. So you can see the agenda with the links to remote access, and of course that's most important for those of you that are remote, at the URL that's shown here. So let's start with what is NSTIC. NSTIC stands for National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. And it was introduced in April of 2011, signed by President Obama. And it's, as it says here, it's an identity management vision and strategy for addressing privacy, civil liberties concerns, and but also enabling a lot of new uses for the internet as an identity platform. This is a great document. If you, it's also available online, and I highly recommend it. It's excellent reading in terms of a vision for what we're going to be able to accomplish with the identity ecosystem. So this term identity ecosystem is a term that comes from the NSTIC. And it's, as it says here, it's described as an online environment where individuals and organizations can trust each other because they follow agreed upon standards and obtain and authenticate user digital identities. So the problem that we have today, and I think everybody has run into it, and I'll have to say that some of these slides are a couple of years old, and so people, it says most people have at least 25 different passwords. I know people that have 10 times that many. And I think that problem is becoming a lot more widespread. People who sort of started off using a few online tools, maybe for banking or maybe for shopping, are finding that they're using more and more. Each of them is creating a username and password, and managing that is getting to be a problem for more and more people. Even strong passwords are vulnerable. There's an awful lot of research that's going into how passwords can be broken. And some of that research is being done, of course, by people who are trying to break passwords for profit or whatever, and also by researchers. And we're realizing that passwords are a weaker link than we had realized previously. Identity theft or impersonation theft costs are increasing, and we keep reading in the news, and some of these attacks, some of these breaches are ones that we saw several years ago. I'm sure we can all name many more that have happened more recently that have been at least as bad as these. And the problem just keeps continuing. Another problem is that identities are difficult to verify over the internet. It's possible to sign in with a username and password, but like that old cartoon says, on the internet nobody knows if you're a dog. We would like to have a platform where your sign-in can somehow be associated with your physical identity when it's appropriate for you. We don't want to break privacy. There are an awful lot of anonymous and pseudonymous transactions that we still want to support, but there are situations where maybe you're doing a high-value transaction and whoever it is you're doing that transaction with really wants to know that that you have that you are a particular physical person that perhaps they've seen in their store or showroom or whatever. Electronic health records are another example of this, where the binding between your physical person and your online activities are especially important. And there are a lot of transactions that we basically can't do right now. You can't get a mortgage online typically, or you can't complete the process. Maybe you can fill out some of the forms, but we don't have enough infrastructure in place in order to do certain types of transactions. So we're relegated to doing kind of the mundane things rather than the things that really would add value to doing online business. Privacy is a particular problem. We want to do this in such a way that we don't create this huge privacy Borg that everybody's afraid of, that where people's information gets aggregated. And I know that there's a particular sensitivity to the role of the U.S. government here, because people in the United States in particular are concerned about their privacy and their ability to do things without being essentially watched by the government whenever they do this. So this provides a foundation. Having trusted identities and having this infrastructure that we're trying to create in the identity ecosystem enhances security. We're going to have better standards for privacy, and there's a benefit that comes from that in terms of what you're able to do and what you're able to do anonymously when it's appropriate. So this slide is kind of a little bit of a vision for what we would like to see in a couple of years. You'd like to be able to apply for a mortgage online, let's say, or you'd like to be able to sign on to websites without having to keep this long list of usernames and passwords that, of course, you're not supposed to write down, but you have to do that because our brains are just not wired to remember 250 difficult to remember things. So the NSTIC, having that concern for the role of the government in mind, calls for a private sector-led effort here, and that's what the identity ecosystem is all about. It's the private sector leading the effort of creating this identity infrastructure, and the federal government supporting that and being an important user, an important what we refer to as a relying party for that, but that the government doesn't actually maintain people's identities, doesn't do the identity management function. So in trying to get this going, the government has done several things. One is to convene the private sector, and that's what we're all about here, is getting a lot of private sector people and yes, some government people together as well, because they're going to be users of this system as well, and funding some pilot projects in order to demonstrate the capabilities of the identity ecosystem and to get some experience with what some of the problems are that might occur when we're trying to do this, and then for the government to be an early adopter of the identity ecosystem, not as a manager, but as a user of the system. There are an awful lot of very important applications that we'd like to be able to do better. On a personal note, I'm going to have to go down to my local Social Security office in order to get my username and password set up, because I'm security conscious and I've locked down my credit. And wouldn't it be nice if we had an identity ecosystem that what's referred to as identity proofing could be shared across other applications as well, rather than being done on a one-by-one basis. So the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group is kind of the place in which this is all being convened. It began basically as an activity that was sponsored by the Department of Commerce, by NIST, and has grown into an independent nonprofit organization, a 501c3, that is continuing this work with the support and sponsorship of the Department of Commerce. So it's already sort of starting to move along out of the government sphere. As I mentioned at the very beginning, idecosystem.org is our website, and basically everything that you should need to find is on that website. There's the rules of association that we're going to talk about, membership agreements, policies. There's we'll get into how to navigate the site, mailing lists, and all those sorts of things in a few minutes. So we started convening in August 2012, almost 2 years ago, in Chicago. Nice central location, and we had a good kickoff for the organization there. And then a lot of the beginning process was, of course, kind of the formative stages for the organization. What are the working groups going to be? What are the, ratifying the charters, deciding kind of how the decision-making process in NSTIC in the identity ecosystem takes place. So we held a first plenary in Chicago. We held a second plenary that was actually sort of a virtual one. I think that was the one that Hurricane Sandy took out. And more plenaries in Phoenix, Santa Clara, and at MIT in Boston, Cambridge. The second year we've continued with another plenary in Washington. We're actually very happy to be actually physically here for the plenary, because the second plenary that was planned for Washington was taken out by the government shutdown. And then we had plenaries in Atlanta, last April in Mountain View, California, and here we are in Gaithersburg in June 2014. Our next plenary will be in Tampa in September in conjunction with the Global Identity Summit, and plenaries beyond that are planned, but we haven't yet determined where they're going to be. So the mission of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group is shown up here. I won't read the slide, but the part that I will read is the guiding principles. You will hear a lot about the guiding principles if you're involved with IDESG. And they are laid out in the NSTIC strategy, and that they are that the identity ecosystem will be privacy enhancing and voluntary. In other words, you don't have to participate in the identity ecosystem as a citizen. It will be secure and resilient, interoperable, meaning that we're not going to have a lot of individual siloed identities anymore, and that it'll be easy to use, cost-effective, designed so that people will want to use it. And there's a set of objectives here. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but basically this is kind of how this boils down into the objectives of IDESG. So the organizational structure of IDESG has kind of two sides to it. There is a management council, which is and it's actually the board of directors for the nonprofit now that we've gone to a nonprofit structure. I'll get into more detail about that. And then there's the plenary, which is kind of the populace. These meetings that we have every few months are meetings of the plenary, although the management council is meeting. In fact, I think they're meeting while we speak. So let's start with the management council. The chair of the management council is Peter Brown, whom I'm sure you will be seeing more of the next few days. And the vice chair is, as specified in the rules of association, is Jeremy Grant. And Jeremy is the director of the NSTIC National Program Office, which is part of NIST and part of the Department of Commerce. So Jeremy's organization is in charge of funding the pilots and managing the pilots. They of course kicked off this organization, and they're also involved. They have staff that, in my opinion, have been hugely helpful in a lot of our working groups in terms of sort of grounding the problem that we're trying to solve here. And Mike Garcia, who is the deputy director of the National Program Office, will speak to you in a few minutes here about kind of a little bit more about their role. You're okay going at the end, Mike? Or okay, shrug. Great. I'll keep going with this. So the way the Management Council is organized is it's organized around a number of different stakeholder groups. And the stakeholder groups represent different sort of categories of people who have an interest and a concern about online identity. And if you're not already a member of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, when you join, you'll be asked to sort of self-nominate to a particular stakeholder category that you think best describes the things that you're concerned about. And so the first one is privacy and civil liberties. There is a usability and human factors stakeholder group, and of course usability and human factors is important in terms of the easy to use goal of one of the NSTIC vision things. Consumer advocates. There is the federal government, which of course is an important relying party here, has some unique requirements, but also state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, because we have a lot of organizations like state departments of motor vehicles and various smaller constituent government organizations that want to be able to leverage the identity ecosystem as well. Research, development, education, and innovation. They've been some of the pioneers in some of the identity work with the work that they've done in granting researchers access to libraries across higher education and so forth. And so they have particular things that they're looking for from the identity ecosystem as well. Identity and attribute providers. So these are the organizations, the entities that will be running portions of the identity ecosystem infrastructure. Identity providers in terms of the entities that authenticate you and so forth and assert who you are, and attribute providers that can enrich that with information about the information about you. Perhaps if you need an assertion that you're 21 or over in order to buy a bottle of wine online or something like that, an attribute provider might provide that information. Interoperability, which of course was another of the guiding principles. IT infrastructure, regulated industries, and an example here being something like the insurance industry. Small business and entrepreneurs, we want to make sure that the identity ecosystem isn't there just to serve the big players, but is also something that's going to foster innovation and not lock out small companies. Security, and then relying parties. So an example here being an online business that wants to use the identity ecosystem in order to authenticate its customers. And then there's unaffiliated individuals. There are others of us that are involved because we have a particular interest in this, and we really need to represent the citizens as well, people who aren't necessarily tied into this other than as users. And then we've got a couple of delegates at large, which round out the structure of the Management Council. So the plenary, of course, is the organization where it's kind of one person, one vote. And we have a chair, Kim Little-Sutherland. The Sutherland part is relatively new, so you'll probably hear a lot of people talk about Kim Little, and it's the same person. And the vice chair is Andrew Hughes, who is also an individual member. And then we have a number of committees that are considered part of the plenary. And I won't go down through the whole list, but you can participate in one or more committees. There are a lot of, in my experience, there's a lot of interesting work going on, and it's hard to participate in as many committees as you'd like. So you need to kind of pick the ones that particularly resonate with your interests and your needs, and join those, and we'll talk about how to do that in a minute. We're supported by an organization called the Secretariat, and the folks that checked you in today are members of the Secretariat. Sudi, who's running, I don't think he's in the room right now, is the managing secretary of the Secretariat from Trusted Federal. Mary Ellen Condon is the executive director, and Steve Mednick, who I think I see in the back of the room there, waving, is the ombudsman, and basically Steve is around to take care of any concerns that might come up as you're participating. So as I mentioned, we've recently gone from being a fully kind of under the umbrella of NIST and the Department of Commerce to being an independent 501c3 organization. And that happened actually last October. There's a little bit of a timeline here. And what we did at the time that was created was we took the Management Council and said, okay, you're going to be the board of directors for this new organization. And the president of the organization is Peter Brown, who is the chair of the plenary. Chair of the Management Council. And Kim Little-Sutherland is the treasurer. She was also very instrumental in getting the 501c3 structure set up. And Kay Shepard-Cohen is the secretary. Now let's talk about the website a little bit. There was an awful lot there, that some of which may not be evident when you first visit it. One of the things that you'll see fairly prominently on the home page is this federated login block, which might confuse people a little bit. We've got Google, Yahoo, and IDESG. One of the things that we didn't want to do is we didn't want to say, well, just go and create a username and password, and we'd be sort of part of the problem rather than moving in the direction of the solution. On the other hand, we don't have an identity ecosystem to use yet, so we had to take a middle ground. And the idea here was to take a couple of providers that can handle your login, and then we also have our own just kind of as a backup. And the idea here is to allow you to use those credentials kind of as a proxy for what we hope will be coming at some point in the future. So what you can do is you can set up an account by clicking one of those logos and follow the steps there. And then when you want to sign in the future, you just click the same button. So if you use Google if you set up your federated login with Google, then if you're logged into your Google account, you can just click Google there, and boom, you'll be logged into the website. It's pretty convenient. Now, I gather since quite a few of you are new here, that you may not have actually joined the organization yet. So there is a certain amount of legalese. It's not super onerous. Some of you that are from corporations will probably need to go off and get somebody to look at the verbiage here. But there is a set of instructions here for joining the organization, and there is a membership agreement. And you also need to pick, like I said, you need to self-nominate to a stakeholder group. So there's a choice of 14 stakeholder groups there, and you should pick the one that you think most closely represents your interest or your role in the identity ecosystem. So after you've joined the organization, and another thing that I should probably mention here is that part of the legalese that goes along with all of this is a set of guidelines for intellectual property rights. And in all of our meetings, we will generally announce that this meeting is under the IDESG intellectual property rights policy. And you should read that and understand it. I'll give you a summary, but I'll say I'm not a lawyer. So, but basically the idea here is we want the people who participate in IDESG to be able to exchange ideas freely, but we want to make sure that people aren't putting things out there that are encumbered in some way, at least without informing people, because we don't want to be inadvertently adopting something that later on turns out to have patent complications and things like that. So the intent of the intellectual property rights policy is to make it so that we can exchange ideas freely, but in such a way that people don't have to be immediately concerned and doing diligence on everything that's said in order to make sure that it isn't encumbered in some way. So getting involved, as I mentioned, there are a number of committees. That's probably in between plenaries. That's probably the main touch point is to join some of the committees, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Connect with other members. You can generally meet them here or meet them in the various working groups. Of course, we've got a lot of leadership positions to fill, and we are not that huge of an organization, so there's lots of leadership opportunities here if you're interested in doing that. And the important thing is to inform the IDESG with your experience and your concerns in order to make sure that we kind of enrich each other with everyone's experience rather than just those of a few. So don't be afraid to speak up. So there's instructions here for how to join committees and mailing lists. Generally, each committee has a mailing list, and then there's a few others besides. So you can you go to the website, click on groups, active committees, and pick your topic. And generally, you just join a. This is a typical page here, and you join the mailing list. If you're familiar with how that works, you give it your email address, and it'll send you a confirmation mail, that sort of thing. And then there's also online calendars. And once you're on the mailing list, you'll start to get calendar notifications for meetings and so forth. But if you haven't been on the mailing list, you can look at an online calendar in order to see when the committee or working group that you're interested in is meeting. So this kind of goes through it step by step, which it tells who the leadership is also, by the way, so you can find out and get up to speed, contact the leaders if you want. Calendar is there. Okay, another way to join the mailing lists is there is under resources there is a menu item called listservs, and you can it lists all of the mailing lists, most of which are various committee and working group mailing lists. But you can join, click the one that you want to join and select it that way as well. And this is kind of a very standard process. So documents. We have a document repository, which is on the site, which is organized generally by a working group or by topic. And so when you go into this documents area, you'll see on the left side a number of folders that you can go through, and then there's documents on the right side which you can download. Various how-to guides. There's a lot. Really tried to make the website as complete as possible. I mentioned the calendars earlier. You can see calendars by working group or kind of a top-level calendar for the IDESG as a whole. There's what the main calendar kind of looks like. It's got just kind of all of the meetings stacked together there. And groups. And discussion forums. And then there's we have a wiki as well, which is another way of publishing information. Some information that is particularly information that is kind of in flux, where we want to be able to quickly make changes while we're having a discussion, or while we're in the development of some sort of a deliverable. That's often done on the wiki. Wiki is also called the Identorama, and we've used it for some things like development of use cases and terminology, catalogs of trust frameworks, business models, things of that sort. If you're familiar with MediaWiki, which is the wiki that's behind Wikipedia, this uses MediaWiki, so it's that form of markup. You log into the wiki by doing the federated login to the IDESG site as a whole. You're also feel free to ask the administrator, ask the secretariat for help with things. They are tremendously helpful when you're lost, or maybe it's like, gee, can you? I fumbled this calendar invitation. Could you send me another invitation to the conference call for the XYZ working group? They will help you with that, and so that's a great resource as well. And so I'd like to thank you for getting involved in IDESG by your presence, either physically or online here. And I hope that you'll have a good experience. Mike Garcia, who is the Deputy Director of the National Program Office, is going to come up and give a little introduction to the role of the National Program Office.
Hey, thank you all for being here. Welcome to NIST. As Jim said, I'm the Deputy Director for the office that is on the federal government side implementing the NSTIC, as we lovingly call it, the NSTIC NPO. Just very briefly, I'll tell you essentially what our role in this is. So NIST, along with a number of other agencies, worked with the White House to originally write the strategy, which was signed by the president just over 3 years ago. So in its inception, I was part of that writing team. We spent a lot of time trying to work with stakeholders in the private sector, throughout the rest of government, state governments, and internationally to try and develop something that was distinctly American relative to a lot of EID programs elsewhere across the world. It is something we wanted to be private sector led. We believed it was the only way that it would work here. And so that was our primary motivation. We focused a lot on the economics of it, on how this would actually work if it were to be commercially supported, as opposed to just the security and technology side of it that maybe if it were a government ID program would have been the focus. As such, the National Program Office landed itself in the Department of Commerce because our role within the Department of Commerce is to foster the commercial success of the United States. And that also means fostering, as far as especially cyberspace is concerned, the commercial success of the internet across the world. And so that is the premise of everything that we do within the National Program Office at NIST. You'll notice, however, that NIST is an agency in the Department of Commerce that has the words standard and technology in its name. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about those things. How can we make this something that, through standards, is technology agnostic so that there can be a marketplace at various levels of the technology stack for identity. Good solutions then can succeed, flourish, profit if offered by a commercial entity. Bad ones can die, wither, and go away, and be replaced because there's modularity and standards that allow that to occur. So this is the second principle that we act on within the National Program Office. So essentially we do three things as far as our actions, our primary actions are concerned. One, we focus on the government, the federal government side of it. We focus on eating our own dog food, as we like to say. So through that, we're working on the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange, or F6, always a pronounceable acronym, or it doesn't exist in the government. And that essentially is a hub mechanism by which you can bring commercial entities, a user can bring commercial entities, commercial identities or credentials that they already have, ideally, or get new ones if they wish to, and bring them to federal government agencies instead of having to create a login at each federal agency or some Uber login for the federal government, neither of which are solutions we think should persist. So what the hub essentially does is it brokers these transactions. It allows you to bring in a certified commercial credential. It says, okay, we'll send you to the agency that you want to go to. We'll send them the appropriate attributes that they need to conduct business with you and no more. And we will not tell the agency what your credential looks like, whether it's a Google credential or a Verizon credential or what other credential it may be. The agency has no idea. All they know is it's a certified credential, and so it can show up. Likewise, the credential provider has no idea what agency you're going to. All they know is that you're going to some federal agency, and they needed some attributes, and we sent them. So in this way, it provides this little microcosm of the sorts of things we want to see in the end stick. It has this privacy-enhancing feature where it doesn't tell more than it has to, but it still allows you to get business done, whatever your business may be, in a more efficient mechanism. So that's currently in a pilot phase. Will be for probably about the next year, maybe a little more, and then we'll be adding more agencies and more commercial credential service providers to that system, and hopefully rolling it out on a large scale. The second thing that we do is that we try to catalyze the development of a marketplace for these sorts of solutions. And so we issue grants. As Jim mentioned, we've issued 13 of them so far. We currently have 10 active projects. And we are in the midst of executing another round of funding for new pilots. So these can have a very wide range. Some of them have a little more of a researchy feel. Some of them are very much a commercial offering. And essentially everything in between. Some infrastructure, some sort of plumbing things, some things that are very much policy-oriented, development of trust frameworks, because this is an ecosystem. There are many, many parts to it, and they all need, in one way or another, to be developed, because they don't exist as a full, coherent ecosystem yet. The third thing is why you're all sitting here today. We funded the development of the IDSG. The way we wanted to do this was not through a contract where we owned the entity. We wanted to do it through a grant. through a cooperative agreement where we said, look, this needs to get started and things need money to get started. So here's a bundle of money. Get this started. And so we see the folks down here, doing AV, and we see that the fact that the lights are on. And today we happen to be hosting it, but this is the first one that we've actually hosted here. These are the simple things that have to get an organization up and running. Now we've kind of pivoted a bit towards deliverables. What does the actual identity ecosystem framework look like? What sorts of policies do we have to have, or certification processes, or self-certification, or self-assessment, in order to let this marketplace start to grow on an interoperable level, as opposed to just the pilots, which are funding targeted solutions. So we think all three of those together, talking to each other, learning from each other, starting to grow larger, taking a broader foothold in the marketplace, and having greater influence over time. Eventually, we will get to what we sometimes joke around and call the NSTIC unicorn. It didn't exist 3 years ago, but we're trying to build it. And through various pieces and parts, we're hoping to get there. So that's the role of the National Program Office. We, as an office, are not building this ourselves. GSA, General Services Administration, and the U.S. Postal Service together are building and operating. They're actually procuring services for F6. We're issuing grants to state governments, to nonprofit organizations, to commercial entities to do that work. And the IDSG now is an incorporated nonprofit. It is its own entity that is private sector led. The government is just another stakeholder. This is how we want to see this work. We don't think that the speed at which technology changes in the identity environment lends itself to the government running it. And so what we're hoping to do, because we have a huge need as government from cost savings and to efficiently conduct the business that the government has to conduct, to see a better world of online identity. So we need to get there some way. And if the government running it is not the best way, this is the approach that we've taken. And we think we're getting there. But with your help, hopefully we'll make it the rest of the way and not too long from now. And that's all I have to say. So Jim, what's your plan for next? Did you want to do questions, or do you have more to say?
Presentation that I had planned. So.
Okay, I will add that in 17 minutes, NIST is doing a mini tour. It doesn't cover everything that NIST does because that would have to subsume the entire 3 days of the conference, I think. But we are doing a tour. It's limited to 20 people, so if you're interested at 11 o'clock, meet directly out here in the lobby, I believe. So I'm happy to stay up here if there are questions, but you're the man.
Okay, well, with apologies to our online audience that I'm not sure that we have a way to accommodate questions from. We do, actually. Oh, better than I thought. Are there any questions either online or here in the audience then? Yes.
You can use that. If you use the microphone, people online can hear you. Ironically, I did not use the microphone to say that.
It's a short question. I'm Peter Goodstein from MITRE, supporting DHS. F6 was the acronym you just used. It was Financial Services Industry Exchange?
Right. It's spelled FCCX for Federal Cloud Credential Exchange, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's just the general ecosystem. It's not industry specific or anything?
Correct.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions here? Anything from online, Sudi? I guess we should probably tap dance for a minute while waiting for the online people, since they probably have to type their questions, right? Doesn't seem like it. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I think that concludes our talk. Then, please, any of us, certainly Mike or myself, but I think any of the leadership here, you should feel free to walk up to and engage and ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask hard questions. Thank you very much. Have a good 3 days.